In this video, we are continuing our analysis of the American Everett Dean Martin's 1926 book, The Meaning of a Liberal Education. The author starts out the chapter in question with a childhood anecdote. He says, "When I was a boy, my parents used to tell me, 'A man is known by the company he keeps.' The saying, while designed to protect youth from the dangerous influence of evil companionship, is not wholly true. Those who are more extroverted and sociable may give less consideration to their associations than someone who is a selective introvert. Whilst it is generally true that people like to be with people similar to them, there are obviously exceptions, and many people, whether it be through ambition or other motives, seek the company of those unlike themselves. Ordinarily, though, birds of a feather do flock together. It is when marked differences of taste and opinion develop that companions drift apart. Hence, it is obvious that the company one keeps is determined in part by the dilemmas he keeps, or the things with which he finds significant issue in life. We do not normally keep the same set of dilemmas through life. Each stage of development presents new challenges, problems, and alternatives. As we mature, our habits of judgment change. We see things in a different light. What was once a matter of vital concern eventually becomes a dead issue. Our interest is caught and our choice determined by aspects of situations to which in an earlier stage we did not react at all. We do not necessarily solve all the problems we face during any stage, but we outgrow and get over them. When we speak of rising to a higher mental plane, this is little else than learning to wrestle with more and more significant problems, brushing off the insignificant, and handling our emotions. For example, the dilemmas of early childhood may be as simple as not biting, kicking, punching, or pinching your siblings or peers, keeping oneself clean, and refraining from inappropriate crying. If such behavior is still an issue for a teen or adult, then they may be regarded as symptoms of significant mental or psychological instability. When a mature adult is found to be behaving childishly, or is still struggling with impulses that ought to have been dismissed from consciousness in earlier years, then this is considered unhealthy fixation and is regressive. An example of such a phenomenon for a teenager may be falling into an overly emotional downward spiral because they didn't get invited to a party, or thinking their world has collapsed because their high school romance ended. Regrettably, there are many examples of young women and men who still act this way in social and relationship dynamics. Think of the numerous examples of girls who may be crying themselves to sleep but then post about their emotions on social media, seeking attention and validation. Or what about the young man who cries and falsely hopes that the woman who left him will return, instead of pulling himself together, ignoring women entirely for a time, finding or reconnecting with a passion or purpose, building a better version of himself, and attracting a better woman? Ultimately, what Martin is referring to when hinting at immaturity and emotional instability is the notion of arrested development, which is undoubtedly far more obvious and prevalent nowadays than when Martin originally wrote the book almost a century ago. Often, this phenomenon of arrested development is demonstrated by a preoccupation with infantile wishes, and sometimes those of early adolescence. In any case, there is a struggle to maintain inhibitions, or defenses against thinly veiled impulses. Simply put, a struggle to control oneself if one doesn't get what they want. A simple example in the case of relationships is believing in the utopian ideal of a fairy tale happily ever after scenario. For all the good things that the true classic Disney-style narrative may have taught us about traditional values, courting and chivalry, poetic archetypes, heroes, villains, masculine and feminine polarity, etc., it certainly also gave us a naive and sugar-coated ideal that our world could be flawless and that our partner could be perfect. No such world or partner exists, nor ever will. But awakening to this harsh reality can be difficult for some. Instead, what we ought to do is make the best of the world we inhabit and foster relationships with those who seek to genuinely understand us, connect with us, and support us in our journeys. Should success or family grow from such a relationship, then one is truly blessed, but there are no guarantees. When a very young child is beginning to discover himself and his little world, he finds his own body and its functions tremendously interesting. Soon after, he discovers that some of his performances command attention. He learns to make use of such performances in order to get what he wants. He will exercise power over his parent or carer by throwing his toys on the floor again and again and crying until someone picks them up. Long before he tries to talk, he notices when people admire him and give him compliments. A very young child will do little stunts by way of showing off and will exhibit irritation if ignored or left alone. He will cry out at any restraint upon his movements or resistance to his wishes. The egoism of which we are guilty of on occasion retains some of the infantile quality, but things like family discipline, social experience, and the awakening of our powers of observation and thought result in new forms of expression. As we grow, this ego interest becomes associated with an ideal of the self and its importance. This ideal self is what an individual guards as his honor or his reputation. Every person is intent upon keeping up their feeling of self-importance. Each feels that an important person deserves special consideration. A normal or healthy sense of egoism becomes to some extent liberated from its infantile interests and is then attached to ends that are socially permissible. That is, we rein in our entirely self-centered ego to levels that are more acceptable so that we may be able to function socially and survive. Our original impulses still remain, but they wrestle with new problems and take on different forms. The wish to be admired or recognized is a factor in all ambition and also in romantic love. A love affair is just as much a mutual admiration society than a phenomenon of sexual interest, if not even more so. In the classic personal development book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, the author Dale Carnegie says, "Remember that a person's name is to that person the sweetest and most important sound in any language. This implies that should we wish to have friends or romance in our lives, demonstrating admiration or recognition of someone by simply remembering and using their name is paramount. Just as the ego's impulse for admiration is significant, so too is the impulse to command. What started as the precocious child throwing toys for others to pick up can later manifest as a desire for leadership, a struggle for political power, a passion for manipulating or reforming others." Martin points out that we also find aspects of the infantile egoism transferred to religion. For religion to be effective, many of the same images and emotional attitudes of infancy may thus be kept alive. The believer may still feel he is loved as the infant is loved by the parent, only now he is loved by his heavenly Father rather than his earthly one. Since he becomes one of God's children, he may again feel he can have whatever he desires by asking the Father through prayer. Self-importance survives as belief in immortality of the soul and as an assurance of salvation. If the core of who you are is immortal and worthy of being saved, then of course you must be important. Thus, with development and experience, the same ego interest we all had as children is gradually transformed in the tasks and challenges it progressively sets itself, and in the scope of the ends for which it strives. Therefore, it ought to be possible to determine a person's mental age by noting the kinds of things which satisfy his ego interest. In common practice, this is a way in which we judge people. Just as small things may amuse small minds, small things may trouble small minds, and small minds may not comprehend big things appropriately. The character of a man is revealed both by the things he strives to gain and the things he seeks to avoid. The thing that most easily shocks, offends, upsets, or angers him is usually the thing that he himself is struggling to overcome. This dilemma troubles him. He seeks to avoid the inner conflict that is gnawing at him by bringing the fight out into the open. He turns the personal conflict into the appearance of a public issue, and from this situation, a moral or social reformist is created. Quite often, it is those who are the most scandalous in private that are the ones clutching at their pearls, obsessing about and demanding censorship in public. As Martin says, they are like those compulsion neurotics who spend their time writing alibis to prove their innocence of the crime they themselves are constantly tempted to commit. The thing a person must make an effort to conceal always betrays them. We all know of the type of person who strives in all things to appear refined, but who are truly not. They try so hard that they make painful efforts for correct speech and proper manners, but it is all for show and very transparent. There are those who are seriously concerned about being in what they consider to be high society. A simple, more modern example may be the young man who takes a woman on a date and tries so hard to appear either gentlemanly or overly nonchalant that he either stresses too much about etiquette or hardly converses with the woman, and when he does, he says nothing educated or interesting anyway, which comes off as a poor attempt to appear mysterious and intimidating, without having genuine mystery or any authentic confidence in his character. Progress in our personal thinking, without which learning is just mere repeating, comes by willingly examining our foundations and examining our problems. It is in helping us to get over our dilemmas that education helps to free our minds. Democracy strives to ignore the cultural differences among people, but education actually intensifies them. It could be argued then that true education is in a way anti-democratic, as it would eventually separate great minds from average ones. It is subjective as to whether that is desirable or not. The attempt to place everyone on the same mediocre plane, even though it be a level considerably above the lowest, is not education. It is a kind of social work. Education means finding one's own level. Like all forms of true progress, it is qualitative and differentiating. It brings out distinctions of human worth, places people on the rungs of a ladder, the gradations of which are discernible in the kind of interests they have, in the quality of their choices, the perplexities they wrestle with and overcome, and the tasks and issues they set themselves. In his assessment of education and human psychology, Martin observed the differences between science and religion, and likened them to that which exists between the two recognized symbols of his country, the United States of America, one being the map and the other the flag. The former is the scientific symbol. It has to do with position, movement, measurement of distance. Maps exist for the intellectual and practical interest. The flag, however, stands for the emotional interest. It has to do with certain historical associations, but is itself no guarantee of the accuracy of any historical tradition. It is poetry. In the Spenglerian sense, science and maps equate to civilization, whilst religion and flags equate to culture. Think of the phrase Old Glory. That is a culturally significant and poetic name for the American flag. In fact, the very concept of glory would be inherently cultural. The utterly civilized and rational man would have no concept of, nor care for glory. Only the cultured soul, the heroic spirit, or the man of imagination knows of and feels such things. Martin concludes that whilst we may be passionate and forthright, it is important to laugh at one's beliefs on occasion, and be willing to play with them so that they may be malleable and grow as we grow, and mature as we mature. Martin's distinct emphasis on play implies that he believes the world has lost its humour and is too often careful and serious about things that ought not to warrant such attention. Martin says, education should help people make an art of living, and the art of living, like all arts, is play. Learn to play with your ideals, even with your sublimity, and you will break the hold upon you of many a crude and hampering dilemma. It was Friedrich Nietzsche who said, "In life, men need play and danger, but they are given work and safety." One could surely assume that Martin would share Nietzsche's sentiments in this case. Such is my passion for the topics I discuss that I've started a Patreon and now most recently an Odyssey channel, because I know that passion won't fade. So if you enjoyed the video or find my analysis and insight valuable, please consider liking the videos, subscribing to the channel, or showing some support, and join the discussions of upcoming video essay topics and future book reviews. Your recommendations would be welcome. I will eventually post channel updates regularly on there, and will give you some insight into the next books or ideas that will be used for content. I also plan to eventually create a Rumble and Subscribestar account, so come back to the channel and keep your eyes open for that. Follow the links in the video description below or on the channel About page under links. Thank you very much for the feedback and support you've shown thus far.